On to our next keynote speakers. April Long is an Aboriginal woman from Narara of New South Wales Central Coast. In 2012, April obtained a Bachelor of Law and a Bachelor of Arts. Krista Mcmeekan is a Noongar woman of Perth and has also completed her Bachelor of Law at the University of Western Australia, and she is now a law graduate at Cawes, Chambers and West Garth. April and Krista are two young Indigenous women that will share their experiences of promoting self-determination and the full realisation of Indigenous rights in Australia, not only at the grassroots level, but also at the international level. Both April and Krista are members of the SNAICC Conference Expert Advisory Group, so it is fitting that they also bring us this final message. Please make welcome both April Long and Krista Mcmeekan, who will talk to us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Gamoyi Yindinji people and acknowledge their elders both past and present, and thank them for their custodianship over land and for allowing us all to be here over the last few days as we talk about the most important business, our children. My name is April Long and I'm privileged to present with my co-presenter, Krista Mcmeekan, who I shared a journey to the UN with as members of the non-government organisation that presented to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. As two Aboriginal women who are lawyers, and please don't hold that against us, we're going to be typical lawyers and examine the law as it affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Australia through a discussion of the Australian Constitution and international law, principally the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These are just two frameworks that we use as Aboriginal people to pursue our legal rights. Another framework, and in my mind one of the most important frameworks, is the invaluable work of our Indigenous community and non-government organisations. This presentation will also focus on their great work to promote Indigenous excellence and the prosperity for future generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. I'm a Gumbaynggirr Darkinjung woman, so I'm very much a visitor here. My ancestral ties to my communities are very strong, but I've also got ties to other communities here in Australia that I've had the privilege to work with as editor of the Indigenous Law Bulletin and the national manager of the National Indigenous Youth Leadership Academy. And I always consider it a privilege when communities let you work with their children and they trust them with you. So I'm going to present on what I call the power of excellence. I want to lift people's spirits. I think we've had some heavy business over the last few days. So I want to lift people's spirits as we go back into our communities. My presentation is based on one core idea. To achieve positive change for our peoples, we must collaborate across sectors, across our communities, from our elders to our youth. Krista's going to present on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. She's going to reflect on our journey to the UN, where we learnt so much, and the role that international law plays. In the work that I do, I'm very privileged to be surrounded by Indigenous excellence. At this very conference, we have heard from the wisdom of our leaders. We've met new deadly young leaders, and we've been absorbed in the knowledge of our academics, our teachers, our doctors, and our community workers. We've also heard about the juvenile justice rates that plague our societies, the health conditions that restrict our communities, and the overcrowding in housing, and of course, the fact that our kids in care are still being removed at a rate greater than during the Stolen Generations policy era. We have all read the newspaper and commercial news segments that downgrade our young people. News filled with images of our people being drunks and our men being criminals and violators of women and children's rights. These images permeate the news and infect the mainstream discourse. However, their effect on our people is much greater. To a large extent, what we don't see in the mainstream media are the 300 young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that I attended university with at the University of New South Wales, or the 40 deadly young change makers at the National Indigenous Youth Leadership Academy that bravely identified real issues in their community and then took action, or the 500 young people in the Community of Excellence, an online social networking site that connects young leaders from around the country. So when these kids log on, they're not just logging on to do a status update, they're logging on to connect with other young leaders and improve themselves. We don't see the stories of success, such as 10% of the recognised top 100 women of influence in 2013 being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. We don't hear about the success of Aboriginal authors like Anita Heiss or Aboriginal lawyers like Megan Davis and Terry Jenkins. That's, of course, unless you pick up an Indigenous newsletter, like the Koori Mail or the Indig Times. So I think we need to celebrate and share our stories internally and externally through our media channels. And the development of NITV to free to air has made a big difference, and not just because I have to kind of go to a friend's place that has Foxtel anymore, but it's because we're starting to disrupt those messages that are being received. The broaden and build theory states that positive emotions widen people's outlooks in ways that little by little reshape who they are. That's a quote by Barbara Fredrickson, who's a positive psychologist. She's found evidence to suggest that positive emotions actually fuel individual growth and resilience. So noting that psychological resilience is an enduring resource, the broaden and build theory makes that bold prediction that positivity actually builds resilience. Now, we know that our communities are some of the most resilient, surviving for hundreds and thousands of years since time immemorial. We also know that our communities are filled with a sense of humour that enable us to not just survive but thrive under some of the most difficult circumstances. So this theory is just telling us what we all know. So with evidence showing us that positivity actually builds resilience in young people, surely we all have an obligation to foster and promote positivity. At the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence, where I work, we aim to build positivity by sharing the stories of success, like our first Aboriginal doctor, Kelvin Kong, our teachers, our dancers, like the Bidigal dancers that just performed, right up to performances by Naisda and Bangara. Through showcasing excellence, the NCIE is broadening young people's mindsets, expanding their opportunities and building their psychological resources. And over time, these positive emotions affect people's emotional and physical well-being. So this is Edward Said's theory. He tells us what happens when the opposite of positivity occurs. When our young people are constantly receiving messages that they're a criminal, that they're a deviant, that they're delinquent, what happens is they actually internalise those labels and they become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The conclusion being that negative labels actually change a young person's self-concept and self-identity to then conform to that negative image. So a negative image about a young person limits their opportunities. Once again, we all know this. We know that stereotypes restrict our communities and our young people. So at the NCIE, we don't work within the disadvantaged framework. Whilst we're aware of the very real challenges in our communities, many which have been discussed here, we don't publicise these stories. We work in collaboration with many of the organisations you see on the screen to drive collective impact and create positive social change. Through strong partnerships, we facilitate breakthrough learning experiences for our young people. We want to reframe the national conversation about Aboriginal Australians and our Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters through a lens of innovation and excellence. This slideshow here just shows a snapshot of some of the amazing community organisations that are making a real positive difference. And being at this conference, I've met so many more. So whilst the statistics are concerning, we don't focus on these and allow our community and young people to be imprisoned in them. For example, did anyone know that the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth found that this year, 94% of our young people aged 4 to 14 are involved in social, cultural, sporting activities. This is compared to only 60% for non-Indigenous sporting and 35% for cultural. The fact that our young people are connected socially, culturally, and through sport and recreation is a fantastic thing to be celebrated, and it's a testament to our strong cultures. So at the NCIE, we surround our young people in these positive images and role models to ensure that our young people know that going to jail is not a rite of passage. Being arrested does not make you Aboriginal. And regardless of your skin colour, you're a legitimate Aboriginal person who may just wear their culture and pride on the inside. You can be a lawyer, a football player, or a professor. There are no limitations. So the NCIE is trying to change the national cultural fabric and expand our possibility for young people. A big issue at the moment that we're looking at in terms of recognition of our people is constitutional recognition. So as it currently stands, there's nothing positive about who we are as Aboriginal people in the Australian Constitution. Moreover, when it was first drafted, Aboriginal people were not involved in the drafting of that document, nor were women. Such an absence to me does not recognise Indigenous excellence or promote any positive messages to our young people. As Antar has recently highlighted, there are more references in our Constitution to lighthouse, beacons and buoys than there are to our First Peoples. As a lawyer and a Koori woman, that doesn't seem right. Now, this issue is in many respects divided our community. The only no campaign at the moment being ran is by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and it's divided my own family. My auntie believes that we are not bound by the invaders' constitution. The current recommendations are weak and will not result in any real change for our people. So all these issues that we have discussed at the conference will not change by changing the Australian Constitution. And to many respects, I agree with my auntie. The constitutional reforms do not include lowering the juvenile justice rate or the infant mortality rate. However, if you apply the broaden and build theory and Edward Say's labelling theory, surely the fact that the national document of this country says nothing about Aboriginal people and our contributions to these lands before colonisation has a negative effect on our people. To be silent on whom we are as a people does not create positive images for our young people. So as it stands, the Australian Constitution provides limited rights. We don't have a Bill of Rights, we don't have a Human Rights Act. So we have some protection like the right to vote, the right to a trial by the jury of our peers, but it's very difficult to say that that's afforded to Aboriginal people when the jury will almost always be made up of non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we've got the right to freedom of religion, and you also have the right not to be discriminated because you're Koori, Noongar or Murri, but it's not because of your cultural race, but because of your state of residency. And up until last night, I thought the state of origin did that every year, but thankfully the Blues got up and got a win. That's a really bad lawyer's joke, feel free to laugh. So as it stands, there's no freedom of speech in our Constitution. We have no right to be free from racism, no guarantee of equality. Australia's Constitution is the only constitution that allows for the discrimination on the basis of race. It empowers our government to make laws on the basis of race, and that's any race. But that section has only ever been used against Aboriginal people. The section you're seeing on the screen now, section 25, is an archaic old section. It's never been used, but it actually contemplates disqualifying people in the states from voting based on race. Again, I don't think this promotes Indigenous excellence or a positive message to our young people. At the moment, we have, of course, federal discrimination laws that protect us. But just like during the Northern Territory intervention, that right, those protections, can be suspended at the whim of a government. The rights that we think we have under the Native Title Act, and whilst not being 100% in the rights that they afford, when Tony Abbott gets elected, the next election, if he so chooses, that can be suspended as well. So an expert panel has recommended a prohibition on racial discrimination, which is the one you see on the screen. It says that the laws must be for the purpose of overcoming disadvantage, ameliorating the effects of past discrimination, or protecting the culture, languages, or heritage of any group. However, who determines whether the law for overcoming disadvantage is for the benefit of Aboriginal people? There is still nothing in this section which requires consultation and collaboration with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So when you're talking to a lot of people about the constitutional recognitions, a lot of them say, well, didn't we do it in 1967? What was that all about? All that 1967 did was allow us to be counted in the census, which is important so that we can, get statistics and things like that on our people, and it means that we were no longer considered flora and fauna. And the other change was it allowed for laws to be made about Aboriginal people at the federal level. So when all the states were coming together and they decided to make this Australia a federation, it was decided that laws would remain a state responsibility. Federal government wouldn't have any rights to make any laws. This created a real problem from Aboriginal people because it depended where you lived, what your rights were, what the mission manager and at the time where you were. So 1967 took some of these negative sections out, but it's put nothing back positive in its place. One positive thing that's been recommended by the expert panel is a language clause, which says that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages are the original languages, a part of our national heritage. However, this section does not create any legal rights. So the rights that Gotha Guthanjaka and I talked about and the importance of bilingual education, this section is very, very symbolic, wouldn't create legal rights. At the moment, symbolic change is the only live political reality. The question people are asking, if constitutional change is a once in 30, 50, 100-year time, is symbolism enough? Aren't our people tired of symbolism? Don't we want to need substantive change? So something of legal protection of a more maximalist kind, and unfortunately Cindy's left us for Canada, but it's section 35 in the Canadian Constitution, which is an agreement-making provision, or a treaty. This has focused, been part of the debate over a number of years. However, it didn't feature in the expert panel's final reports. And I think there needs to be more work done to really see who would the treaty be between. How would it create positive changes for our communities? I don't believe a treaty and constitutional recognition are mutually exclusive, nor do Professor George Williams, who's a constitutional law expert. He sees them as two pieces in a larger puzzle, a stepping stone to one another. However, other people in our community believe sovereignty needs to be dealt with first. It's never going to be a good time to talk about sovereignty. It's always going to be a contentious issue. I'm of the opinion that sovereignty is a political issue, and we need people like the Tent Embassy, we need people in our communities pushing at a political level. But the Australian Constitution is a legalistic document. We need legal reform to ensure, right here, right now, we have stronger protections for our peoples. But at the same time, I keep thinking, you know, attending this conference and listening to people in our communities, will constitutional change make any real change on the ground? I'm not here to campaign about constitutional recognition. I'm simply here to educate people, because the thing I find most concerning is this issue is being put forward to a referendum and some of our people know nothing about it. A change that's meant to be for the benefit of Aboriginal people. So what I really wanted to call for today was a real celebration and I guess the dedication of our people to achieve real change. We're all trying to do something important for our mob. We're just doing it in different ways. Some of us support the constitutional change, some of us don't. We are diverse, our communities are diverse, and our cultures are diverse. But what we need is more collaboration and respect for that difference. As I said, I respect that others have a different view about changing the constitution. But earlier we heard about changing the hearts and minds. That's what you need to do with the constitution. Only 8 out of 44 have ever succeeded. So we're not very good at this constitutional change business. But 1967 was the most convincing yes vote. Most people came out to support Aboriginal people. All of the constitutional law research tells us if people don't know, they vote no. So constitutional change can only be achieved through collaboration across sectors. Similarly, if we want to disrupt these negative images and messages that are constantly portrayed to our young people about who they are as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we must work together to celebrate Indigenous excellence. I believe partnerships are a powerful thing. The title of this conference is for children living and learning together. That's something I did at the United Nations with Gotha Guthanjaka and Krista Mcmeekan, along with an NGO delegation. So international law is just another way that we can advocate for our rights, and I'd like to invite Krista to come forward and present some of those ideas to you.
Thanks, April. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which we meet today, the Gmoyi people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And before I start, I'd actually like to give a quote from Barack Obama. He said, "I'm inspired by the people I meet in my travels, hearing their stories, seeing the hardships they overcome, their fundamental optimism and decency. I'm inspired by the love people have for their children, and I'm inspired by my own children, how full they make my heart. They make me want to make the world a little bit better. They make me want to be a better man." And that's the message that I'm taking away from this conference today, and I hope you've been similarly inspired. My name is Krista Mcmeekan. I'm a Noongar woman from the southwest coast of Western Australia, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to work with a number of government, non-government and private sector organisations seeking to promote self-determination and the full realisation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights in Australia. Having qualified as a lawyer, I'm passionate about the advocacy of human rights, of cultural development and of reconciliation in our communities. My work in this area has been across a number of fields, including community programs, educational programs, and campaigns for recognition not only in the Constitution but also in mainstream society. This pursuit has taken me to the international stage on a number of occasions, the most noteworthy of which was our presentation to the Committee on the Rights of the Child in Geneva in late 2011 to give the committee some perspective, along with April and Gotha, of what it's really like for an Aboriginal person growing up, living and working in Australia. The focus of this presentation was on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and particularly its requirements in relation to the detention of youth, opportunities provided to and the meaningful engagement of youth, and the ability to exercise culture, as well as the recognition of culture in the broader Australian community. For me, I think the most shocking part about Geneva was how interested they were in what we had to say. And what's scary about that is it shouldn't be. We, as Aboriginal people, belong to one of the oldest, if not the oldest, culture in the world. We are Australia's first peoples. We have a unique understanding of and connection to our land and each other, and we've experienced some of the greatest traumas and trespasses against any individual race. So we have a lot to offer. But being listened to and heard is an experience that we get so infrequently on our home soil, particularly with issues concerning our children. How often are we given control of matters that affect our people? How often are we actually listened to and not merely consulted on issues that disproportionately affect our people? And how often do governments and companies in Australia take into account our cultural practices and obligations when drawing up periods for discussion before putting through another ill-thought-out piece of legislation or policy which seeks to take away control of our own futures by limiting our income management, limiting recognition of our rights, and creating an increasing number of avenues towards forced adoption, detention, and imprisonment for our children? One way to empower ourselves and our communities is to develop our own awareness of the mechanisms and processes we can use to address the issues affecting our community, and then bring them to the attention of others. This can mean talking to other members of your community, the media, your local council, the big companies or investors in your community, or even the internet community. But in communicating awareness of what is happening, of our international human rights, of successful Aboriginal programs, and of our views, you are taking affirmative steps in having the issue and our views recognised within the broader Australian community and the international community, and having an impact on those issues and making a difference by lifting the veil into our communities and having our voices heard. If we want to see positive discourse and change in our community, I believe we need to start right there, in our communities, in our families, and this is what we've been focusing on all week, supporting and strengthening our families. In order for this to happen, the communication coming out of our communities should not just be limited to the issues we face, but should also extend to our triumphs. I know that there are a lot of positive things happening in our communities, and they deserve to be shared not only amongst ourselves, but with the broader Australian community. I'm calling for an end to the negative discourse regarding Aboriginal peoples, largely perpetrated by the media, and issuing a call to action for constructive work in our communities, not only to acknowledge the issues we face, but to give proper recognition to grassroots programs in our communities making a difference in areas of health, education, sport, community leadership, to name a few, in which our people and our youth are excelling. Because this is the message our children deserve, and this is the message Australia needs to hear. We are strong, we are successful, and we are determined to make a change. I work with a lot of cultural and educational programs in my community which seek to provide guidance and opportunities to our youth. But one program with a difference is SNAICC Perth. This is a women's leadership and empowerment program which offers young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women 6 weeks of training in public speaking, self-awareness and self-confidence in league with SNAICC Perth Committee, the David Wirrapunda Foundation, and top Indigenous model and mentor Shannon Maguire. During this time, the young women are encouraged to articulate and develop their plans for the advancement of our community, before being given a platform to share this with their presentation to the community. One lucky advocate is then given the title of Miss NAIDOC Perth and provided with a 12-month platform from which to engage with the community and effect real change in the issues they're passionate about. Having just completed our 2013 campaign, I can tell you a few things about our girls. They're stunning, they're intelligent, they're incredibly proud of who they are, but they're also very passionate and concerned about our community and the future of our children. This is the kind of thing the media and the broader Australian community should pick up on. Proud Indigenous youth engaging with and positively promoting their communities and their culture. Programs like Miss NAIDOC recognise that while we may not all be born to be politicians, we all have a voice, and we can all be teachers and makers of change within our community. Gandhi once said, "If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the nature and attitude of the world towards him. We need not wait to see what others do." That is to say that personal and social transformation go hand in hand. It is not about one person alone changing anything. Unjust authority can only be overturned by great numbers of people working together with discipline and with persistence. And this is the way Aboriginal culture has always been, learning together, teaching each other, and moving forward together. We should be continually collaborating between ourselves, our communities, and the broader Australian community, like we have been all week, on how to create even more success in our communities by sharing our stories, sharing our experiences, and learning from each other. This way we get an idea of the bigger picture and sharing the success together as one people, as one Australian community. I think it's easy to feel alone as we step up to the issues facing our community every day. But if we learn anything from this conference, I think it's that we're all in it together. And together we have the numbers to make serious, substantial and permanent change. One avenue I've learned a lot about our rights from, and which impacts on the broader Australian community with respect to Indigenous rights, is international law. International law is one of the many mechanisms that seek to provide an avenue for the recognition of our rights here in Australia, and to support the development of a discourse that is removed from the trauma, the shame, the blame and the knee-jerk reactions of our past, and to promote prosperity and excellence for the future of our children. And that in a nutshell was our experience in Geneva, an experience which resulted in tangible outcomes being promoted to our government by the UN, and which saw a commitment to the instalment of a National Child Rights Commissioner, Mcmeekan Mitchell, that you all met and heard from earlier this week. Perhaps the key document which promotes the engaging in this positive and equalising discourse of Aboriginal advancement is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I know Ben's presented to us on how to incorporate its principles into our daily programs, but speaking more broadly, this document, to which Australia is a signatory, sets out the individual and collective rights of Indigenous peoples, including rights to culture, identity, language, employment, health and education. It also emphasises the rights of Indigenous peoples to maintain and strengthen their own institutions, cultures and traditions, and to pursue their development in keeping with their own needs and aspirations. It prohibits discrimination against Indigenous peoples, and it promotes their full and effective participation in all matters that concern them, and their right to remain distinct and to pursue their own visions of economic and social development. While this is an excellent recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples and creates an international standard, Australia has not adopted this document into national law. It is therefore, in a legal sense, not binding. I therefore strongly urge the Australian Government not only to adopt the principles of the Declaration when addressing Aboriginal issues, but also to enshrine this document in domestic law so that it represents a baseline requirement for all negotiations and developments with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, and not simply our aspirations. In speaking of aspirations, I think it's important to echo April's comments and to emphasise not only the importance of constitutional recognition for Aboriginal Australians in and of itself, but also the importance of substance over symbolism. We, as Aboriginal people, do not simply want lip service from the government. Our country, our people, in fact all Australians deserve better. Australia is a developed first world country. We should have first-rate recognition of our country's history and its future. And that's where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their children lie, in the heart of the future of Australia, not trapped in its past. It's for this reason, among many others, that Australia's founding document, the Constitution, should substantially ensure the recognition and equal development of its First Peoples. I strongly encourage you to access the information available in regard to constitutional reform and to make a decision for yourself and become an advocate in your community and share that information so that others can make their own decision. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the kind of conversation this generates, the enthusiasm of people in your broader community for the recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution, and the strength and unity that develops as a result of this joint process. After all, recognition isn't just for us. It's about all Australians standing up together, recognising our history and our future. On that note, I encourage you all to take the lessons you've learnt this week, not only from the formal sessions, but from your informal discussions with your colleagues, brothers and sisters, and take them back to your own community. Use that energy and that momentum to make the changes you want to see, and shift our national discourse from one of shame and regret to one of hope and strength in our collective futures, because we all know that our children deserve better. To quote Obama once more, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek." Thank you.